hospitality on our behalf of North Carolina State University for all of our team that are visiting here today. This is a wonderful program. We've learned a lot about your university and your country, and we're very pleased. We hope that we can continue with the kind of interactions that we're having now. You're very smart students, very smart faculty, and we appreciate that very much. So we hope to continue our collaborations in the future. So again, thank you for attending this lecture. This is a very important series of topics. Energy is important for the whole wide world, as you can see here. I'd like to start out talking about the big picture, which in the big picture is where is electricity used around the world, and you can see that it's everywhere. Everywhere that things are moving, things are being built, things are being manufactured, and where people live. So certainly North America, South America, Africa to a lesser extent, certainly Europe, Asia, and all the population centers of the world need electricity. And that's really what we're talking about here when it comes to nuclear energy. So I'm going to talk about nuclear energy today. In a sense, it's an old form of electricity, but meaning that it's about 70 years old in terms of nuclear power development in the United States and in the world. But at the same time, it's new. It's new because there are new developments in nuclear energy that I'd like to point out to you to make it cheaper, safer, more widely available to everybody. So that's what I'm going to talk about today. In the United States is investing heavily in nuclear energy right now. Today we announced one of my other roles in the United States is the director of the U.S. Department of Energy Nuclear Energy University Program, which funds many universities in the United States on a competitive peer-reviewed basis for funding in nuclear energy projects. We just announced today a new round of funding that will be available. It'll be about $50 million in funding that we're announcing that will be competitive. First proposals will be due in January, and I'll talk about that later as a means of collaboration with other countries in the world. So what I'm going to talk about today is the nuclear industry around the world and in the U.S. in particular, advanced reactors that are being developed, large research initiatives, including NC State, and the possible collaborations there that we could talk about in the nuclear energy area. As I mentioned, nuclear energy has been around for quite a while. First generation nuclear reactors were in the 1950s, before many of you were born, before all of you were born. Obviously. Well, some of you may have been alive, but quite a while ago, those plants are retired. We went on to the second generation. Some of those plants built in the 1970s are still operating in the United States. Then on to the third generation, certainly in the world, and then the third plus generation, I guess you could call it, plants that are being built now, and much safer, much more thermally efficient, and have lots of advantages over some of the previous generations. So that's really where the action is, and in the future, advanced reactors that are being developed in the United States as well as other countries in the world. Just to give you an idea, I know this is hard to read, but it shows where nuclear generation is around the world in various countries, but the second column really shows where new nuclear plants are being built presently around the world. The United States, just a few plants. One was completed, another 2 to 4 are being built right now, light water reactor kind of plants. But as you can see, places like Turkey, UAE in the Middle East are building nuclear power plants, and Japan is bringing back online some of its nuclear power. Russia, of course, United Kingdom, the British are building nuclear again because they don't have natural gas, they don't have oil, they don't even have clean coal, so they don't have any other alternatives. So the reason you see nuclear power being developed here in many countries is because they don't have alternatives that would be viable. For instance, China, 30 nuclear power plants being built in China right now. It's a big worldwide development project. They're using US technology as well as technologies from other countries. And so the United States and other countries are helping China actually get to that point. Very polluted in China. They burn a lot of coal. They want to get rid of the coal, and they want to use something clean like nuclear energy. In the US, we've talked about, Dr. Iqbal talked about the introduction of renewables. It still has a long way to go, but you can see here what's changed in the last 15 or 16 years in the United States. First of all, the electricity demand has not increased very much over that period of time. And that's because of a variety of reasons, including better efficiency, conservation, but also less manufacturing in the US. But at the same time, you've seen a reduction in use of coal for electricity production, an increase in natural gas in the United States for a production of electricity because of the large amounts, new discoveries based on fracking and others in areas where gas turbines are very useful in terms of handling peaking, other combinations of gas turbines with renewable energy, very useful. So that's on the increase. Nuclear is about steady. It's about 20% of the total electricity generation in the US is about 20%, and that's continuing. There are a few plants shutting down for economic reasons only, and so we'll have to see how that plays out in the future. A few plants coming online. Hydroelectric, I think it's about 8%, 6%, something in that range. That's not going to change very much in the US. And then you can see wind energy coming up on the far right at about 4 to 5%, I think, of the total amount of electricity. And solar, I believe, is on the order of 1 or 2% in the US now in terms of the electric production, kilowatt hours produced. It will come up in the future, but now it's still very small. Higher in some states, as was mentioned, like California and a few others. Production costs in the US, of course, have changed. Petroleum has gone way up. Nuclear has gone up a little. Natural gas has gone way down because of the new discoveries, and that's why so much natural gas is being used in gas turbines in the US right now. That's really setting the tone for what the cost of electricity is going to be in the US. These are where the nuclear power plants are distributed in the United States, mostly in the eastern half of the country. Diablo Canyon in California is going to be shut down here eventually. So most everything is in the eastern part of the United States, and any of the new plants that are being developed and constructed in the US are mostly in the southeastern part of the United States, which is including North Carolina, of course, on the East Coast. So we're in an area where new generation is needed because it's a growing economy, it's a growing population, and so that's where you see the development of nuclear power and renewables actually in the United States. In South America, of course, there's a couple of plants in Argentina, one in Brazil, very limited, a little bit in Mexico, but and a little bit in Canada, of course, too, outside of the US. The rest of the world, a lot in Russia. I'm not going to show Europe because Europe has quite a bit of nuclear as well, especially in France, which is 70% nuclear. But you can see China, India, Pakistan, UAE, development of nuclear power is still moving on fairly strong. Japan, Many of those plants are shut down because of Fukushima, but some are starting to come back online. So I'm going to talk about some of the new developments in nuclear energy and what some of the universities are doing to help participate in this redevelopment of nuclear energy in the future. Nuclear energy projects are large projects, lots of concrete, lots of steel, lots of construction workers, lots of jobs. And so it's a very intensive kind of energy source. From that point of view, it takes a whole commitment of a country, commitment of a government, commitment of economic resources to accomplish this, and that's why everyone is not doing it. At the same time, though, it provides stability. Price of uranium is very low. There's no CO2 emitted in the process of nuclear energy. The waste problems are very minimal and can be handled. And so in that sense, it's actually very safe. At least in the United States, there have been no accidents in many, many, many decades and no deaths at all in that technology. I would challenge any technology of any size to make that claim. So you can see, as a carbon-free source of electricity, this is very important for the United States and for the world. As an example, in our backyard in North Carolina, the Catawba station outside of Charlotte has been operating for many, many years. The kind of problems that our university, NC State, is working on through one of our consortia is eliminating one of the sources of downtime operation in that facility is called crud, which is part of the chemistry problem associated with water flowing through the reactor. Watts Bar is another nuclear power plant that our faculty and students have worked on. Watts Bar is in Tennessee and not too far from us. And this is a very important source of power for that region of the country. This is one of the Chinese plants I'm in that's being finished right now. It will go into operation very shortly. It's a pressurized water reactor, and the kind of problems our faculty and students at NC State are working on include the flow of water through all of the inside core of that reactor, and I'll talk about that in the future here. In the future, near future, it looks like the market for nuclear energy around the world will be involved with smaller plants rather than larger plants. Smaller plants have the advantage that you can build them perhaps quicker, put them in place in modules, in smaller bytes or bits, but they're still pretty big. They're still 50 megawatts or 100 megawatt electric devices. But you could put a couple in this tent. It's not too big. On the right, you would see what one of these small modular reactors would look like. There are companies in the United States building these now. NuScale company is building a modular reactor of this type. It will be safer, it's more efficient, requires less water, has the advantage that if there is some kind of disturbance, it can sit there and percolate on its own. It doesn't need off-site power. So a very safe kind of reactor concept. So NuScale building this kind of device is actually going to be sited perhaps at the Department of Energy Idaho National Laboratory site out in Idaho, where many of our faculty and students work alongside the Idaho National Lab staff. So this is very exciting for the United States to see NuScale produce a new modular kind of reactor with many advantages. So in the future, you may be seeing more of these kind of, not only in the United States, but around the world. Other countries are developing modular reactors. Again, no, going the wrong way. License renewals in the U.S. Through the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, very important topic. There are various scenarios in the future depending upon how the license renewal process goes as to what fraction of the total amount of energy will be delivered by nuclear. I remember nuclear is a baseload kind of electricity. Dr. Iqbal mentioned the load following problems and associated with renewables, and so how do you integrate that into the grid? Nuclear is one of those sources that's pretty steady. It can go up a little bit and can go down a little bit with time, but it's a base load capability, which has strong advantages for stability in the grid. These are some of the type of reactors in the U.S. fleet right now from various vendors. AP1000 from the Westinghouse organization, advanced boiling water reactor from General Electric, and new designs coming online all the time. These are some of where new licensees are being developed, possibilities in the U.S., and again, many of them in the Southeast, including Florida, Texas, North Carolina. Whether or not these will be built, we don't know for sure. They're just going through the process of starting the licensing because it's a 10-year process to get through the licensing. We want to make sure we build these things safely. So the Nuclear Regulatory Commission watches over these very strongly. Some of the advanced reactor concepts that people are talking about not only are being invested in by the Department of Energy, which is, I guess you could say, where we do the basic research, but also many companies, as you can see here, are coming up with new designs for new, advanced, safer, more efficient reactors based on non-light water reactor technology and different designs that have many advantages. For instance, I'd point out TerraPower. TerraPower is owned by Bill Gates, who owns, of course, Microsoft. He's investing in nuclear power because he sees the advantage of providing power to base load for lots of different reasons, for various countries around the world, as well as for electricity for many of his computers, I suppose, and data centers as the future evolves. So many companies are involved with these new generation designs. Some are very small companies, like Transatomic is a spin out of MIT. NuScale was a spin out of Oregon State University, and so forth. So another initiative by many of those companies and the Department of Energy is to develop, and also that our faculty and students are working on, are something called accident-tolerant fuels. If you remember in Fukushima, one of the reasons that the plant there had instabilities was because of hydrogen released from the zircaloy fuel cladding. Accident-tolerant fuels means that new fuels are being developed that don't develop that capability. So they don't produce hydrogen under high temperature conditions. So a number of our faculty are working on different kinds of cladding and or fuel structures that will avoid that problem. And much of our money from the Department of Energy is going in, as well as companies, to develop these kinds of new fuels. And of course, it takes 10 to 15 to 20 years to develop these kinds of new structures. And so that's why universities are involved at the present time in making sure that we can come up with new forms of, for instance, stainless steel or other alloys that don't have the same problems as zircaloy. There's legislation occurring in the U.S. Congress to help nuclear develop, as well as in the administration, current administration as well, not only on the nuclear energy side, but on the nuclear security side. because whatever we do, we want to make sure that nuclear material does not get into the wrong hands. So nuclear security, along with nuclear defense, as well as the kind of nuclear non-proliferation problem that we're talking about here, are all very important to the United States and to our allies. These are the plants that are either have been finished or are being finished, or eventually will be finished in the U.S. Watts Bar was just completed. Vogtle 1 and 2, which is on the Georgia, South Carolina border. Hopefully in the next year or two, very large plants. The summer plants are currently on hold and will probably not be finished on time until the new owner is found. So that's a big uncertainty right now in the U.S. But our graduates from NC State University are involved with construction of all of these plants. In fact, the construction energy business in the U.S. for nuclear is based in Charlotte, North Carolina, which is about 3 hours from NC State. Excuse me. So I mentioned the small modular reactors. This is another slide showing the size and the scope of the SMRs on the left. A possible site either at Clinch River or in Idaho. More than likely will occur. They've submitted their licensing documents to the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, so these are moving right along. They have funding. They're looking for that development site to show that what they can do, how quickly they can come up to speed. Many private organizations supporting the development of nuclear energy in the U.S., as I mentioned, including private institutions, Electric Power Research Institute, Third Way, which is a national think tank that looks at nuclear energy policy as well as energy policy in general, organizing the advanced reactor community. So still a strong interest in nuclear in the U.S. Again, another picture of the NuScale power plant as it would be built. The advantage of the NuScale plant is that it's built in a manufactured environment, in a separate plant, and then carried by truck or train to the site where it's going to be located, dropped in the ground, I guess, or in a concrete vault, and hooked up to the water supplies, et cetera. So all the manufacturing is done pre arrival on the site. Should be much cheaper, much more straightforward, much more reliable than trying to build on site. One initiative that the Department of Energy has right now, as well as talking about supporting of the universities, is something we call GAIN, which is the Gateway for Accelerated Innovation in Nuclear. GAIN is an attempt by the Department of Energy to integrate or to get more support to industry in the U.S. This is just one way we're going to do it. It opens up all the national laboratories to accessibility by private industry in the U.S. This is very important so they can do testing, so they can do radiation hardening experiments, et cetera. So the idea here is to support industry from the government in a more meaningful way and hopefully stimulate more interest in nuclear and development in the nuclear area. This is the second year that the GAIN program has occurred. There's a voucher program. Small amounts of money are available to support this program, and it's moving along very nicely. This is also a word slide that shows some of the support from Congress and others in terms of working together along with industry to support nuclear. Oops. There are a number of different reactor concepts out there. One of the new ones that's being revived, I guess you could say, is the fast breeder or the fast reactor as a testing facility. This is a facility that would probably cost on the order of $3 to $4 billion and would likely be built at the Idaho National Laboratory. Some of our faculty at NC State now are working on this design and to help the Department of Energy. So our students and faculty actively getting involved in this process right now through projects and joint faculty positions and others with the Idaho National Laboratory. So it truly is a joint university, national lab, and industry effort. Again, this is a list of the number of companies involved with the advanced reactor community out there in the U.S., TerraPower, Terrestrial Energy, et cetera. And it's very exciting. It's very exciting to see all of this private venture money coming in now. It's not the same old people designing the same old reactors. These are new venture businesses coming in and putting real private money into development of new nuclear for advanced designs, safer designs. And so that's very exciting. I've never seen anything like this in 30 years. So it's really an exciting time to be a nuclear engineer, to working in the nuclear power area for both students and faculty because of many, many opportunities that have come about recently. This is another concept called the molten salt concept, which is being developed. In fact, the molten salt would be one of the fast reactor possibilities for the next generation of those reactors. Been a number of projects on molten salt design, including Oak Ridge, led by Oak Ridge National Lab, TerraPower, Southern Company, which is our utility south in Atlanta, and universities as well. Is another example of the kind of multidisciplinary, multi-company kind of involvement in universities that are being successful now. There are plants being shut down in the U.S. right now. I did want to mention that. It's not because they don't work or because they've had an accident or anything like that. It's because the price of natural gas is so low, they can't compete economically to produce electricity. So if you can put in a natural gas peaking unit or even a base load unit with gas turbines with very low cost of natural gas, even existing nuclear power plants can't compete with that. Neither can renewables, for that matter, or many other sources of energy. So it's a concern in the U.S. that some of these good plants are being shut down because you lose stability. Price of natural gas tends to go up and down over long periods of time. It may have environmental impacts. It may have, as we sell more liquefied natural gas to other countries, the price of natural gas may go up because there is a world market for that product. So we're watching this very carefully in the U.S. It does mean as some of the new plants come online, it means some of the older ones will be shut down in certain markets. So in the decommissioning process, when you do that, you're talking about, of course, taking the old fuel out, taking eventually each of the components out, disposing of those in one way or the other in a safe way, and then after cleanup, making that site perfectly clean again and confining anything that might that might have to be confined as necessary. Of course, many plants have been shut down in the U.S. already over the years, probably 25 plants. So it's nothing new. It's just an ongoing process. So some of the projects that our faculty and students are working on are doing design efforts. We have a very large innovation hub sponsored by the Department of Energy called CASTLE. CASTLE stands for Consortia for Advanced Design of Light Water Reactors. NC State is the main university with partners MIT and University of Michigan. As part of this group, designing new computational tools to design this next generation of nuclear reactors to make them, again, more safe, more costly, not more costly, less costly, but more efficient. So a big effort along those lines. CASTLE up on the right is one of our efforts in nuclear engineering at NC State and sponsored by the Department of Energy. Of course, there's light water reactor program out of DOE, fuel cycle technologies, and NEAMS, which is the computational group out of DOE. A multi kind of approach to new design of new reactors using computational tools that weren't available 20 or 30 years ago. This is CASTLE. That's the previous Secretary of Energy, Stephen Chu, who helped get this going. And very exciting project. It's been ongoing now for 8 years. It's about $27 million per year, $27 million per year effort over that period of time, involving multi-universities, national labs, and industry. I'll show a picture here of, skip over that. These are some of the main partners in CASTLE. Of course, NC State, University, MIT, Michigan, also Sandia National Lab, Los Alamos, Idaho National Lab, and then the three industry partners, Electric Power Research Institute, Westinghouse, and TVA. So this partnership has continued. Other partners have been added, other universities, other companies. So this is the kind of environment when we talk about NC State working with industry and national laboratories. This is an example of the kind of large work that we can accomplish, meaningful work at a university like NC State. So I hope you're interested, some of you, in perhaps studying these kinds of subjects in the future in graduate school or even as an undergraduate. We have undergraduate students working on these projects along with our faculty or any of the partners as well. So I think it's a great opportunity. We hope that you can be involved with these kinds of things. International collaborations with Seoul, National University, and others. So again, this is kind of where we're going in the future. The whole idea behind CASTLE is to redesign that core over on the right-hand side for a light water reactor. And it's multi-scale, multi-dimensional modeling, including multi-physics, which includes the chemistry, the materials, the two-phase water, heat transfer issues, as well as the nuclear processes, radiation transport, et cetera. So very exciting kind of field. We're competing with the French and others to develop the best tools in the world to design these kind of reactors. I'll skip over some of the details of the modeling, but you obviously can see it's three-dimensional, multi-physics kind of modeling. That's what the core of a reactor looks like in real time when they're shuffling the fuel around. It aids the designers of the nuclear reactors very much to see how things are going in over a period of a cycle of the core itself. So again, this is the kind of work that our students are involved with, a variety of problems involving a lot of multidisciplinary kind of work. which is essential to be done to solve these massive problems associated with new technologies. This is a general slide showing another line of DOE work involving new computational tools as well outside of CASEL. It's called the NEAMS program. This is actually a little bit smaller. This is about $20 million a year. Involves other labs and other universities throughout the U.S., as well as some of our faculty at NC State. Fuels product line, which is the design of new fuels, as I mentioned. New codes that are developed between INL, Oak Ridge National Lab, NC State, and other universities. From the very basic atomistic simulation to mesoscale modeling up to engineering scale modeling, all very important. I'll skip over some of the details of the fuel design here with the details of the codes that are connected together to do this kind of simulation. This is also kind of the work that the Naval Reactor Program does in the U.S. Of course, the Naval Reactor Program designs the reactors for the nuclear submarines and the aircraft carriers, et cetera. Involves a similar set of codes for the design of those reactors, but those reactors, of course, are classified very much off to the side. We don't work on those directly, even though our graduates go to those programs in the U.S. And so very similar to the kind of work there. These are the major national laboratories in the U.S. working on nuclear issues. I mentioned Oak Ridge National Lab, which is not too far from us in North Carolina. Oak Ridge is in Tennessee. The other major labs are, of course, Idaho National Lab out in the west, which we work with very closely, and Los Alamos Argonne National Lab in particular. So those are the major partners that we work with. Of course, I think we need to be concerned a little bit about nuclear waste in terms of how those products are stored over a long period of time. So we have students and faculty working on solutions for storage of waste. Right now, spent nuclear fuel is stored on site at most locations in the U.S. There are plans to put that spent fuel into longer-term repositories and in a safe way store that fuel in caverns like Yucca Mountain in the U.S., which is being revived at the present time, or recycle that fuel and use it over again. That's another possibility. Oh, that was a moose. I have to tell you why I showed that. Moose is the name of one of the real important codes that was developed at Idaho National Lab. As a sidelight, they name all of their codes after animals, like moose, marmot. Don't ask me why, but that's just what they do. They were actually very important codes to do analysis of temperature, chemistry, heat transfer, all very real engineering problems, radiation transport, heat development within the nuclear structure using those codes. Mammoth is another one, rattlesnake, bison. Very exciting place to work. In terms of NC State's nuclear engineering program, NC State had the first degrees in nuclear engineering in the United States. Now think about that. When were the first degrees in nuclear engineering awarded in the United States? Well, it turns out the first master's degrees were in 1953 in the United States. The first PhDs in the United States, 1955 at NC State University. First nuclear reactor in the United States in a non-classified university environment was at NC State University in 1953. In fact, the first student that received their PhD in nuclear engineering in the United States was from South America. the first student that received their PhD in nuclear engineering in the United States was from South America. Does anyone know what country? It's not Colombia, unfortunately, but it's another country in South America. Argentina close, no, it was from Brazil. Brazil. One of the students in 1955. So we're very proud of that. We also had the first woman PhD in the United States in nuclear engineering in 1970. Now, she was from Egypt, but she was the first woman PhD in nuclear engineering in the United States, 1970. So we're very proud of the heritage that nuclear engineering has in the world, and in particular, the United States. So currently we have 124 graduate students, 133 undergraduate students, and I'll show you the faculty here. There's the faculty involved in a variety of areas. We've hired a number of new faculty from around the world, China, Germany, the Middle East, and others. And so these are the kind of folks, world-class faculty, that if you come to NC State as a visitor, as a student doing research or something else, these are the kind of people that you would be working with. So we're very proud of that fact. We do have an existing 2-megawatt nuclear reactor. It's our 4th reactor. It's the only sizable reactor in the southeast of the United States at a university right now. We're very proud of that. And a number of nuclear centers, as I mentioned, including Castle, but also other centers working on nuclear power internationally with the South Africans, with many countries in Europe, the Japanese and others. It's just a wide-ranging, expanding kind of work environment. So these are the kind of codes that students work on. We also have education programs for K through 12, et cetera. And this is a particular center that's working on novel designs of new core designs for existing power plants that make them more efficient. Kostadin Ivanov and Maria Ivanova are working on that. So I'm very proud to present, the kind of activities our department, but also where the state of nuclear energy is in the world, and in particular the United States. I still think there's many opportunities. There's lots of jobs available at every level, bachelor's, master's, and PhD in the U.S., as well as other countries in the world, as nuclear expands. And so I would invite those students that are interested in this new and expanding field, consider NC State. The other things I didn't even mention and talk about were things like medical uses of radiation, which has expanded considerably, and our faculty are involved with medical physics and those kind of applications, also use of radiation in many other different kinds of applications, industrial and others. So a variety of possibilities there. So I very much thank you for your attention, and if you have any questions, I hope to answer them. So thank you very much.
Good day, Mr. Gilligan. Thank you for your presentation.
You're very welcome.
I would like to make a two-part question, maybe. Well, throughout the whole presentation, you were talking mostly about fission, nuclear fission, because it is actually the only effective process we have worldwide. I would like to know about if the NC State research team has approached the possibility of fusion or the generation of electricity through the burning of radioisotopes. I believe it's another form of generation.
Yeah, those are two good questions. Yes, we do. In fact, my field of research is in plasma physics. So when I still have students, they work in plasma applications, which of course is the fundamental building block of nuclear fusion in the world right now. So we do have programs in nuclear fusion at NC State. We have three faculty working in that area. Mohammed Borum, Katerina Stapleman, and Steve Shannon, and including myself. I think we do some experiments at NC State, do some computational work, but we also send our students to Oak Ridge National Laboratory, which has some more sizable devices that we work collaboratively with Oak Ridge. And of course, Oak Ridge is part of DOE, which is supporting the ITER device in France right now, which is the world's largest construction project related to nuclear fusion. And we hope that works. It's very complicated. And I think there is support for nuclear fusion and interest in nuclear fusion by students and others. It would be ideal if we could get nuclear fusion to work in a controlled way that we'd like to. Of course, we know that it works. It's the sun. But we'd like to bring that down to earth and make it more useful for local generation of power in various ways. So in that sense, all solar power is nuclear fusion. So there you go. I think that, so we do have programs. We teach courses in nuclear fusion and plasma technology in general with other applications. The other part of your question, so yeah, that's a good question. The other part is nuclear isotope energy. Of course, with nuclear isotope energy, like plutonium-238 and others, is what powers the small electric generators on for NASA, Explorer on Mars, and those kind of applications, or satellites. Basically, that's a thermal electric process, very useful for small power applications. Doesn't scale very well for large applications. For watts or tens of watts or 20 or 30 or 40 watts, that's fine. But for when you're talking about megawatts needed for, or thousands of megawatts needed for cities and so forth, it doesn't scale at all. But it does work, and we are making use of that. Some of our students work along those lines. Idaho National Lab in particular developed those little pellets that go into those into that Curiosity rover that's still on Mars working today, that's used by NASA to power that particular robot. And so it's very useful, it lasts a long time, very, very reliable. And so our students work along those, you can work in that area as well. Yeah, good question. Other questions?
Yeah, how is safety changing the construction approach for the new nuclear plants, and how is decommissioning being considered? I mean, is a retrofit being considered now that the new rules for the new nuclear plants is being enforced?
Yeah, retrofit of current plants, you can change out components like steam generators, and but you can't change out the core itself. Of course, fuel is changed out all the time, once every 3 years, or in that cycle. So there are retrofits along the line, especially for sensors and monitoring, controls, constantly being upgraded and improved. Unfortunately, the NRC is not convinced that digital is the way to go yet on control systems. But eventually, if we get over that, then I think that will open up things more to the digital world that we know is ultimately better. But the Nuclear Regulatory Commission is concerned about hacking of nuclear power plants, and we don't want that to happen through the internet and other things like that. So these are all self-contained units. But yes, there's a lot of retrofits of existing plants to improve a lot of the performance. However, it doesn't get into the basic core itself. There's still light water reactors, pretty much designed the way they were 10, 20 years ago. It's only the new plants that would molten salt or the SMR designs that would be more radically different that I think we'll see the new technologies, new fuels, new coolants, new controls really used. So yeah, that's where things are going. It's a good question. Thanks. Yes.
Good afternoon, Mr. Gilligan. My question is, how about the current supply of raw material for nuclear fuels? There is something new about the supply chain of nuclear fuels right now?
The question is about nuclear supply chain of fuel. I guess the best way to answer that is there's lots of nuclear fuel in the world right now from various continents, Africa, Australia, US, Canada, others have uranium in the ground that you can dig out very easily. The price of uranium is fairly low, relatively speaking. It's not a big cost of the total nuclear fuel cost or nuclear power cost. It's controlled. Of course, it has to be controlled in terms of you don't want uranium and other raw materials going to countries that are going to use it and not in a good way. Of course, we know that there's examples of that currently in the world. But it's tightly controlled. A lot of the effort by the U.S. is to monitor that fuel or monitor the uranium and other components of that to make sure it doesn't fall into the wrong hands. Obviously, it's not 100% successful with countries like North Korea and Iran and others playing rogue status in terms of that development. But they're nowhere near the threat, I think, perhaps portrayed in the media. I'm hoping that's the case. So the supply chain for fuel is pretty well known. You dig it out of the ground. It's a chemical mining process, filtering it, refining it into the kind of well-known products needed, yellow cake and others, and then through the process either of the CANDU reactors in Canada. It doesn't have to be enriched, but for all these U.S. reactors and most of the reactors in the world, it has to be enriched in U-235 by the diffusion process or others. And so that's how we control who gets that uranium-235, which is the real essential part of the fuel cycle. Where I think we have to be concerned is countries that to develop a nuclear weapon, for instance, you don't need nuclear power. And it's also true to get nuclear power, you don't need nuclear weapons. So you can separate out the two. So there's really not a direct correlation between the two. It is connected, though. You do need particular kinds of U-235 isotopes or plutonium to do the weapon side, but it's a separate process, actually, compared to the nuclear power side of things. Does that answer your question, I hope? Yeah. Good. Well, I hope to have you visit NC State University. You've been very kind to us, and we appreciate it very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much.